Hi there and welcome to the channel, and this my May wrap in which I reflect on both the quantity and the quality of the books I read this month. Now in terms of numbers, I finished 5 books this month, which seems to be the average when I'm working and studying. It will go up significantly in June when the semester ends, and I'm still working my way through 3 more books. So let's begin with those I finished, and first we have this, Boccaccio's The Decameron. This took 2 months to read. So I finished it in May and it was a magnificent reading experience. I sincerely recommend this to any English major. Reading it in its entirety would be my advice. However, if you don't have time to read the 100 or 101 stories in here, scholars disagree on quite how many there are. I suggest you at least read the final 3, the last of which is the Griselda story, upon which Shakespeare based his play, The Winter's Tale. That is just magnificent. Then I read 2 short novels by Rhys. Okay, so they are Voyage in the Dark and After Leaving Mr. Mackenzie. Of course, Jean Rhys's best known work is White Sargasso Sea, her rewriting of Jane Eyre. This, of course, is a masterpiece, a true 20th century classic. However, there are many videos about that book on YouTube, so I thought I would focus on these. Okay, the first is actually After Leaving Mr. Mackenzie, published in 1931. The painting on the front is by Modigliani, the Italian artist, and it is actually mentioned in the text. It's his reclining nude. So this is highly autobiographical. It begins in Paris and it focuses on Julia Martin, who's leading a life of a single woman where she basically sustains herself through relationships with men, and she's just had a payoff from Mr. Mackenzie, and in the wake of that she's kind of having a crisis and she returns to London for 10 days, during which her mother dies, and then with her tail between her legs, figuratively at least, she returns once more to Paris. Now this is more interesting than entertaining compared to this one, Voyage in the Dark, but what it really reminded me of was Patrick Hamilton's The Slaves of Solitude, which I've reviewed. It had the same kind of dark tone, and what's really effective is the focalization. You see Julia through the eyes of men, and what you realize as you listen in on the thoughts of these men is they're all guided by the same set of beliefs about how one treats women, and so you see the difficulty for a woman in engaging in relationships with these men. They're all rather unsympathetic and heartless and only out to get what they want, and the moment a woman becomes inconvenient, these men really resort to similar methods to get rid of them. So I would consider this, yes, a proto-feminist novel, and very interesting in terms of its craft. This one, Voyage in the Dark, is much more lively, but I think the actual story is less interesting in terms of its departure from convention. This is very much the tale of a girl losing her innocence, being exploited by men, finally falling pregnant at the end, then having an abortion, and basically being returned to square one. And again, it features having to rely upon the largesse of various men, but it's more cynical in this one. I say innocence. Yeah, the character is sexually innocent at the beginning, but they're not innocent about men. Their friend is advising them to get everything you can out of a man, if possible, to get them to set you up with an apartment, buy you jewels, and so on. So both of these were very interesting and I would recommend them. Next, we have this Dr. Glas by Hjalmar Söderberg, a Swedish writer. This is set in Stockholm, and it was produced in 1905, and the world is basically the Stockholm of that date, and it's in journal form of a very, very strange doctor, and the plot concerns 2 of his patients who are married. One of them is an elderly clergyman, and his wife is young and beautiful, and the doctor has a hatred of this clergyman, and basically the wife comes and ropes him into her plan to avoid having to accede to her husband's sexual demands. And so the doctor comes up with these false diagnoses. First, of the cleric, tells me he's got heart trouble, so he best stop having sex for like 6 months or so. When that doesn't work, he cooks up a cock and bull story that the woman has some internal problems, and so she also needs a break from sex. For how long? About another 6 months. This doesn't work either. The woman also has a lover, so it becomes rather complicated. But what makes this book so readable is just the various aspects of the Doctor's character that are communicated to you. There's his snobbery, there's his kind of naivety, there's his cynicism, there's his lyrical aspect. It's quite poetic in places, and there's just this overwhelming strangeness of this man, and there's a great climax, which I won't go into. I wouldn't wish to spoil it. Reminded me in some respects of Thomas Mann. It's a highly literary performance. At one moment, I noticed that it ended with what I believe is a reference to a Maupassant short story, which I couldn't dig out, but then 20 pages later, he then explicitly references Maupassant. There are many literary references buried in here. What a work of art. Very, very short, actually, only 130 pages or so. Intro by Margaret Atwood, highly recommended. And the final book I finished this month is Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida. This is a long narrative poem, sometimes called the first novel in English, and it's about 3 characters. Troilus, who is a Trojan. He is the brother of Hector, younger brother, and Cressida, who is also a Trojan. Her father is a traitor. He's gone over to the Greek side, having had a vision which tells him that the Trojans will ultimately be defeated. She's also a widow. And then we have Pandar, who is her uncle, and he brings Troilus and Cressida together through his scheming. He's a loathsome character, and it's where the verb to pander comes from. And this is just a beautifully produced translation into modern English by this guy, Philip Crabb. It really astonished me at some certain points in terms of how beautifully done it was. So I guess this is the translation I would recommend. I can't imagine getting anything better than this. So if you're into poetry, narrative poetry in particular, this is a wonderful effort. Actually, what distinguishes this from the Canterbury Tales is it's complete. So it's one of Chaucer's few complete works, and that just adds a whole new dimension to it. Being able to appreciate the entire design of this master poet. Yes. Okay. Those are the books I finished, and now I'm reading sort of 3 books at the same time. And I did say in a much earlier video that I tend not to do this, but for very long books, it's kind of unavoidable. You can't just say, right, I'll only read this 1,000-page book and nothing else will disturb my reading. So I'm reading 3 fairly long books at the same time. The first of which is Marguerite de Navarre's The Heptameron. 70 stories in this one, and it is, of course, based on Boccaccio's The Decameron, written a century or so later by a woman who was close, maybe the sister or the wife of King Henry II, I believe. And it's not quite as polished as the Decameron, but it is distinguished by the fact that all the stories in here are true. That does lend it a certain something extra. I'm on the 10th story. The 9 I've read so far have been rather short, but pretty good. The 10th one is about 50 pages long, so I haven't quite made my way through it yet. Then another book full of stories. This one is spread over 66 days. It's Jan Potocki. He was a Polish nobleman, and he travelled, well, pretty much everywhere. I think he travelled more than Marco Polo. He went to China, the Caucasus, all through Europe, and most of this is set in Italy. Some of it is set in Spain, and it's more interwoven than the Boccaccio or the Decameron. You get stories within stories within stories. I think it goes 5 levels down at one point, and this I would describe as kind of Gothic picaresque, drawing on the same kind of folkloric sources as Matthew Lewis's The Monk. So this was right up my alley. Absolutely superb. There are vampires, ghosts, pirates, bandits, Kabbalists. Yeah, excellent. The opening 150 pages or so is just so confusing because there are all these visions every night after the bell strikes 12 for midnight. So you can't really be sure whether what is taking place is a vision or happening in reality. and you get multiple perspectives on these events. It seems that the ghosts of two shepherds are roaming and adopting various disguises and seducing people, and then in the morning you wake up under a gallows with a noose tied around your neck, and then, oh my God, what happened to me last night? Was it real or not? Highly recommend it. Oh, really? All of the books I've read this year, this is definitely right up there. And my final monster that I'm working my way through is this. I'll pronounce it both ways. I guess in America they call him Montaigne. Yeah, Montaigne. In British English, we get this Montaigne. Doesn't really matter how we say it. He's the prolific French essayist with a very humanistic bent. And I'm sort of at the end of book one of his essays. So I'm 290 pages in, as you can see. I'm marking it as I go because I'm finding many things here that are actually kind of useful to my studies. Although it's very difficult writing in the 21st century about illness narratives to suddenly drop in a quote from, what is it, the 1600s and say, well, Montaigne writes this, but I'll try and find a way. Maybe I can just use it as an epigram at the start of a chapter. This is in a wonderful Everyman edition, and it also includes his travelogues too at the back. So it's as much Montaigne as anyone could wish for in a single book, printed on very nice paper, actually. So there is my reading as it stands for May. June, as I indicated, I'll be able to read much more. Now I should choose my book of the month and thank the Buy Me a Coffee donors for the month. What are we going to have? I believe that the choice should be, well, it would be easy, I suppose, to choose Chaucer because it is just a classic of English literature, but I'm going to go with the more surprising discovery of this month and name Hjalmar Söderberg's Dr. Glas as the Disappointed Man's Book of the Month for May 2024. Please get hold of this and read it if you can. I'm absolutely sure you will love it. Okay. Now, with regards Buy Me a Coffee, there was just a single donation this month, which is understandable because I wasn't really prolific in terms of producing videos in May, but Clutterbuck stepped up and bought me 30 coffees. What an incredible donation. So many thanks to you. If you wish to follow Clutterbuck's example, you don't have to purchase 30 coffees, but however many you'd like to, then follow the link in the description or on the channel homepage and you can support the channel. Actually, my next book haul is going to be books which I bought using the funds that you've so generously donated. So watch out for that in the coming days. And now, all that remains is for me to bid you farewell. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.